So to start, my name is Natalie, as I mentioned. I use she and he pronouns. I am in Black autonomy and have a history of like Black feminist organizing for a long time, but I wouldn't be able to tell you when. And I'm based here out of LA, but I'm originally from New York, and I'm the daughter of Leda and the granddaughter of Juana, who passed away a few years ago. With that, I would love to introduce Thandisizwe, who's not just a homegirl, but an intellectual who I'm very excited about discussing, being in conversation with today. So I just pulled this from your website, so from Rootwork rather. Thandisizwe Chimurenga is a new African revolutionary nationalist, a longtime activist, an independent grassroots journalist based in South Central Los Angeles, California. She is the creator of Rootwork, Getting Down to the Roots, a broadcast of interviews, news, and analysis of people, ideas, and concepts that aims to dig deeper than mainstream colonial media, currently airing on KPFK 90.7 FM, Pacifica Los Angeles Radio, and the Black Power Media platform, which is now the Black Liberation Media platform. As of recently, thanks to all the beef. Thandisizwe is also a co-founder of Black August LA and a member of the editorial committee of the Rebuild Collective. Thandisizwe is also the author of No Doubt, The Murder of Oscar Grant, Reparations Not Yet.
Murders of Oscar
Murders, okay. Also author of Some of Us Are Brave, Interviews and Conversations with Sisters in Life, Art and Struggle, volumes 1 and 2, and the co-author of What We Stood For, the story of a revolutionary Black woman, co-written with Deborah Jones, who we will dig deeper into. If you haven't heard her name, you probably heard the situation. So last time when we were supposed to be meeting, Tandy, also, do you want to add something about your bio, like who you are, what your interests are?
No.
Okay, good.
It'll probably come out.
Yeah. So I had prepared an opening from the last time we were going to be here, which actually was the anniversary of George Floyd's murder at the hands of the police. So I just wanted to, like, in spirit of that, just to uplift his last words. He literally said, "I can't breathe," very much mimicking Eric Garner in 2014. But like many of his other predecessors, he was also shouting for his mom, right? The collective mamas all turned out in the streets for him. So another person who's also a martyr now is Miss Sissy, his mom, and I definitely wanted to bring her name into the room because his call for his mother also moved many of us into the streets and to continue the work of Black Liberation Movement. And another person whose name I want to throw in the pod is Marcia Howard, who is still actively one of the main organizers at George Floyd Square and has been holding the list of demands till this day. Her TikTok videos are incredible. She has a gun literally every corner imaginable in her house, and I was like, damn, I want to do that. But Marcia Howard is incredible and is the meaning of what we talk about when we talk about current grassroots Black women-led organizing. So yeah, any reflections on the maybe other names? Because we have 2 volumes of Some of Us Are Brave, and there's a lot of people in there. Ayana Lavanzat, I gotta say, like, I really love that, because if y'all don't know Ayana Lavanzat, what she means to Black girl, and like her like mental health and like religious and spiritual conversations are hilarious. But if there's someone that's missing and you're like, I wish I had interviewed this person or included them, is there someone that comes to mind right now?
Well, when I was compiling the audio for this, there were a couple of pieces that I really wanted in and couldn't find them. So that was a heartbreak. But before I get into that, I just want to say that I am appreciative to see so many people who, who present as male here, listening to us discuss women's stories and Black women's stories in particular, because I don't think that happens enough. So I appreciate you all and thank you all for coming out, and of course, thank you all for having me in the space. So let me also give you some background real quick. So Some of Us Are Brave was started by a collective of Black women on Pacifica Radio, KPFK, Los Angeles, back in 2003. And I kept all of, most of the majority of interviews that I did, but we never established a centralized archive. So I may or may not have other women's shows. I don't know if they do. It's a long story, fell out of touch. So Some of Us Are Brave, even though that was the name of the show, which was done by a collective, the majority of interviews in here are either interviews that I conducted myself, or audio that I recorded and played on the air, or audio that I recorded with permission, meant to play on the air, didn't get a chance to. So basically this is predominantly my work. And when I told the publisher, who's a Kenyan brother by the name of Firoz Manji, based in Canada, when I told him that he wanted to name it Some of Us Are Brave, I said, well, you know, it's not just me. Some other women might be feeling some kind of way about that. He said, let's be brave and just call it Some of Us Are Brave. I said, all right, let's do that then. So we take our name from, we took the name of the group from a book called But Some of Us Are Brave. And it's from a longer piece that says, all the women are white, all the blacks are men, but some of us are brave. And it talks about how black women are usually erased when it comes to discourse around gender and race. And if black women are feeling erased, how are indigenous and other women feeling, right? So that's a little bit of backstory on the Some of Us Are Brave.
Nice. Is there someone that you wish you would have included, or that you're thinking about, like, you know what, I wish I could, if I could bring this person back?
If I could bring them back?
Yeah.
Man.
I know, I'm giving you a whole, like, multiple generations, hundreds of years of rapport.
Well, you know, the Smithsonian put out a couple of compilations a few years ago of different black voices. And I think it's in volume 1, I'm not sure. Yeah, it's in volume 1. They had an excerpt of the actual voice of Ida B. Wells.
Oh, wow.
Speaking. So that's included in it because I use that audio in a radio program. But I would love to have Ida B. Wells.
Wow.
I would love to interview Ida B. Wells.
Well, I'll tell you what, I lived in Chicago briefly, and I fought tooth and nail and did not get this apartment that was 2 doors down from Ida B. Wells' home. And if you just go across the street around the corner, it's a church that she used to go to, which a lot of, you know, Frank Chapman, but they do another like black radical activist, they would have all their meetings there. And I also came to learn that there's a cemetery specifically for Confederate soldiers there in Chicago, which, like, to me, I don't think, oh, Confederate, Chicago, same thing, right?
At the north, yeah.
The north, right? But anything, you know, that's saying anything south of Canada is the south.
Is the south, right.
So it was a really interesting moment for me.
I went to Chicago, it may have been, 2014. I was part of a panel discussion with Ida B. Wells' great-granddaughter. So I got an opportunity to go by the house in Brownsville.
Yep.
And to go to her grave.
Yeah.
And that was special. And it was actually, the program, I think, actually occurred on March 25th, which was the day she passed away.
Yeah, wow.
So that was really special for me because I consider her to be my spiritual mother.
Isn't that your Instagram handle? What's your Instagram?
Twitter is Ida B. Wells, B-E-E.
Yeah, Twitter, Ida B. Wells, B-E-E. Well, then let's, let's bring her into the room too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my mama, right?
Yeah.
Spiritual mama.
Well, I'm going to jump in on another thing that unites us. In your introduction, you mentioned Cooperation Jackson, which is if folks are not familiar, it's a Black-led self-determination cooperative in Jackson, Mississippi, attempting to free the land. So, like, I know our mutuals include Kali and Saki and Arlene Eisen, who was part of, like, helping build some of that as well. But free the land is something you hear a lot, and I don't know always what it means. Like, to me, it means very many things. So maybe if you can get us started, like, what does free the land mean to you? Like, how do you interpret that? How do you bring it?
Well, free the land comes from what is known as the New African Independence Movement. The New African Independence Movement is that section of the Black Liberation Movement which seeks to establish, stake out land to black folks, descendant of Africans who were enslaved in the U.S. In the late 60s, once we made the transition from civil rights to black power, people were talking about what actually is power. Self-determination, the right to determine your own destiny, to decide the affairs of your community. And a group of black folks got together and said, well, we're more than a community. We fit the classical definition of a nation. But where is our land? We said, well, African people were brought here to the Deep South and have remained here in large numbers, in some cases as the majority, since that time period. Even though we've had migrations north and to the west, we still maintain a majority. And if you are familiar with Charles Blow, New York Times columnist, he did a book a couple of years ago called The Devil You Know, talking about the fact that we have remained in the South. He's not a New African, by the way. His politics is, liberal, traditional. But he talks about the fact that we have remained a majority in the South, in these areas of the Black Belt South, the Deep South states, and that we need to do a reverse migration and go back there and, vote, take over offices, and, excuse me, so that we can be self-determining and control the areas where we are in the majority. So in the late 60s, they had a series of Black Power conferences. One became a Black Governmental Conference. And they said, you know what? In addition to being a nation, African people, black people, are owed reparations. We labored for over 400 years for no money. So in addition to being owed for our labor, we have been discriminated against. Jim Crow, redlining, all kinds of discrimination. We are owed redress for that also. As part of the reparations demand, it should be land. If we remember, after the Civil War, General Sherman of the Union Army, the Union Forces, Special Field Order number 15, which gave, under his control at the time, he allowed those Africans along the Sea Islands to reclaim or to claim the land that they had been working on in terms of the plantations, because they told them, all we need is some land and we'll be all right. So land has always been, control of land has always been something that black people have sought. And so during this governmental conference, they said, well, you know what? Reparations is not just cash, it's technology, it's changed behavior in terms of policies, but it's also land. Black people are 10% of the US population. We should have 10% of this land, which equals what? Out of 50 states, 5 states. It should be 5 states within the Deep South: Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and South Carolina, or what is known as New Africa. You've heard of New York, New Amsterdam, New England. This is New Africa. And so the cry began to resonate: free the land. Free the land from the control of the US and return it to African peoples. A year, maybe 2 years ago, the Community Coalition and some other organizations held a march and rally going down Figueroa in South LA, and their cry was free the land. It's like, get rid of these motels and these liquor stores, because that's not what this community means. So when people say free the land, even though that comes out of the New African Independence Movement, we have always had relationships with the indigenous people. Free the land, return the land to them. In terms of the Southwest and what has been called Aslan, free that land. We all know about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, correct? Where the United States stole Mexico. That land needs to be free. All of this land needs to be free. And as part of the relationships African people have established, we've always been in conversation with indigenous people. We've asked their permission: can we remain here and be in control of this land where our people are buried and have helped build up our blood is in this soil? And their position has always been, as long as you're caretakers of it, we ain't got no problem with you.
Yeah.
So that was a long answer.
No, that was a perfect answer. Because it covered everything that needed to be mentioned, right? Like
Free the
we're
land of
talking-
Palestine.
Free the
Free the
right.
land of Palestine.
When we talk about free the land, I know that like at least for New Africans, we're thinking of 5 states in the South, but really truly we're talking about free the land from colonialism, free the land from imperialism, free the land from
Absolutely.
the unceded territories, right? So I think Palestine, I know for many people resonates. It is an indigenous, it is an indigenous people-led movement. So we want to definitely make sure to honor. So I don't think it was a long call. I don't think it was a long answer at all. I think it covered all the bases that we needed to. So
Free the land of New Zealand, free the land of Australia,
all of them.
free all that land.
They can keep Europe for sure, but the rest of them we need free back. So, I mean, that was great. I also want to name that in chapter 1. So Aminata Moja is the first person I think, that you interview. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed it. I'm going to read from here because I don't have highlighted. Mm-hmm. But in page 6 of volume 1, Aminata says, excuse me, we're taught to think in terms of things as a hierarchy. This is the Western way of thinking. We're taught to think in terms of things of what comes first, what comes second, what comes third. And then we're taught as young Black women grow up in the struggle that the race, the nation must come first. We see that as a joke because really, they're really talking about the Black man, right? Because if we're talking about nation, then certainly that fits that we should be fighting against sexism because we are half the nation. We're more than half the nation, as a matter of fact. And, we know this, we hear this all the time, right? Like the Black Panther Party was 75% women. And in fact, we know that as COINTELPRO was really cracking down and arresting a lot of men, it even became more exponentially, largely women that were selling the papers, driving people to, the police to, what is it, the prisons to like visit your family. So, there's a lot to be said there. And then she continues, let me see, you know what, no, we can stop it there. I just want to stop and acknowledge that, right? Like, because this is the connecting thread even with Deborah's story, right? When she's in the US organization, which we'll get to later, it is largely women that are doing all this work. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that? Like, how did it become that so many Black women were a part of these organizations and were still actively fighting sexism? Is this something that happened just in the Black Power movement, or is this something that we see everywhere?
It's something that we see everywhere.
Right.
One of the things that Aminata talks about is our intimate relationship with sexist oppression. We learn it at home,
right,
before we venture outside of the house. Her presentation, Aminata Moja is a member of the New African People's Organization, one of the organizations in the New African Independence Movement. And her presentation was given decades ago. It blew my mind then, and it still inspires me today. I was there, I recorded it, kept the audio all this time, and once I started broadcasting on KPFK, played the audio on the air. That's why it's in the book, because a new generation needs to read her words. She was talking about the fact that why aren't more Black women involved in the movement against sexist oppression? Because, and theorizing, of course, because we consider that to be the white woman's thing, feminism.
right.
But she talks about the fact that not only do we also, as Black women, suffer from sexist oppression or experiencing sexist oppression, we also have a rich history of fighting against it, predating and independent of white women. So how is it that the majority of Black women don't seem to be involved in that fight against sexist oppression? Well, because we recoil when we see what white women have historically done. You got all of these criticisms of white women, from white women, of Donald Trump, and yet 53% of them still voted for him, right? They were out there marching with their, what people call the pink pussy hats, talking about him groping and all this, that, and the other, but they still voted for him. And of course, the reason why they still voted for him, the reason why they fell in line is because of white supremacy, which is the glue that binds all white people. But the point being, we saw how the Black liberation movement was attacked, but the feminist movement did not appear to be attacked during the 1960s, during the height of the Black Power movement. and as Aminata goes on to talk about in the presentation, she says that there was like an undercurrent of extreme dislike for men in the mainstream women's or feminist movement. She said that turned us off. And then she talks about the fact that, of course, the hierarchy that put the race first or the nation first, which meant put black men first. Because if you're talking about the nation,
Let's talk about it.
we're more than half. So anything that concerns us and our well-being is the nation's problem. It's not a women's issue. But then she says the fear of ostracism, of being called names,
Right.
being called a dyke, being called a ball breaker, being called a feminist. And then she said something that has been my mantra ever since I heard it. She said, I don't care what you call me. I am fighting for my liberation as a woman and as a new African. So I don't care if you call me a feminist. I don't care if you call me a womanist. I don't care what you call me. I am fighting for my freedom. Period. End of discussion. And if you hear the actual audio of Aminata speaking, she's high-spirited and animated. So you can't help but be moved by what she's saying and how she's saying it. And hopefully it jumps off the page that same way, but it's nothing like actually hearing her voice.
Well, I actually haven't listened to her voice on it, but she is an incredible orator. I've heard her speak in other occasions.
Oh, okay.
So I'm glad. I mean, just because that's just we're a small group of people, y'all. We're a very small group of people. I mean, in fact, I know that I've definitely had conversations with Thandisizwe and been like, hey, do you know this person? And it's like, oh yeah, of course I do. Like, my boss. Like, I was like, wait, how do you know my boss? So it is a very small, like liberation, organizing, activism, whatever you do, and then on top of that, as like Black women, it's even a smaller group of people, right? Someone though that is very famous, that is in your book, is Natalie Matos.
Yes.
And I just want to just to kind of continue on this trajectory of anti-sexism, just like the different challenges that they had. If you go to page 117 on volume 1, so you had an episode of group work recently that actually made me want to revisit that. But here, let me see. On page 117, it says, the question, it's a long one, but just bear with me, it's necessary. The question of sexism affects political work in many cases. For example, I joined the movement in the 1960s. I participated in different organizations, and since I was new and young and didn't know anything, I basically was happy being a gopher. Because you can learn a lot from being a gopher. I don't want to spend the rest of my life as a gopher, and there came a point that then I began to resent people thinking that I was biologically destined to be a gopher. She chuckles. That's where I started to get rough. I began to see that the sisters were the most efficient people in almost all of the organizations that I worked for. We're also the most silent people in the organizations that I worked with and for. And we're also the most neglected, unlistened to group of people in all the organizations I worked with, and the most powerless people, she goes on. The image of a leader was always male. When people would talk about leadership, they'd say he, there was never any female counterpart to the leader. It's something that we all as women face. How do we make ourselves heard? Why did this particular conversation feel important for you to cover in the book? And how does the sentiment come through in the way a lot of these women talk?
Well, like we titled today, Revolution Without Women Ain't Happening. I felt it was important when I was on the air with Some of Us Are Brave, and since then, Black women's stories have to be told, especially stories from the 1960s and 70s, the civil rights, Black power, Black liberation movement. Because if we say we are fighting against an enemy, white supremacy, capitalism, imperialism, how are we going to be able to fight and defeat that enemy when we are having fights and oppression within our own houses? Now, because I'm an African woman, a new African, this has been my focus. However, I would venture to say that sisters who were involved in the Brown Berets, who were and are involved in Union del Barrio, and whatever other organization, American Indian Movement, whatever organizations are out there fighting against imperialism, I would venture to say that those sisters and those organizations have had similar experiences to black women. And one of the reasons why is because the United States is a sexist society. It is a patriarchal society. We're not going to escape it. It's not all men's fault. Primarily the white man, but it's not all men's fault. Women internalize sexism and patriarchal attitudes just like men do. Patriarchy does not benefit us, and all praises be to Bell Hooks, who preached the fact that patriarchy also harms men, even though y'all might not know. But getting back to the original motivation, it's important that these stories are aired so that we can identify these issues and be done with them so that we can more effectively fight against imperialism, against capitalism, against cis hetero patriarchy, and all the other bullshit that keeps people oppressed. We have to do it. Because it's like you're fighting with one hand behind your back. It might be your strongest hand, but it's only one hand. And who made the decision that women should stay home and let men fight anyway? We have a right to be free, which means that we have a right to participate in the struggle to free and liberate our people. Additionally, we may have some ideas and ways of looking at things that brothers miss. So I think all of these are reasons why it's important to have black women and other women tell their stories.
Yeah. And
incidentally, is it volume 2? Volume 2. So, you know, I do this thing where I say sister and sister, brother and brother, you know, kind of like the N word, right? The way that we talk with one another. So in volume 2, the last chapter says sisters in struggle. These are not black women who are included here, but these are one is a white anti-imperialist by the name of Linda Evans. Linda Evans is one of the anti-imperialists who did time because of her work with the Black Liberation Army, freeing Asada and all that other stuff. And then we have Stormy Ogden, who's Kashaya Pomo, Tule River Yokets, Northern California. And she talks about indigenous women in prison. I was able to record them at a book party for their essays that were included in a book. That's how I came across the audio, played it on air, and I thought it would be important to include their stories in the book. So I wasn't always able to include other voices when I was on the air, but other voices are always, always, always important. Because one of the things that works in favor of our oppression is alienation.
right.
You know, y'all over here in Huntington Park, y'all don't know what I'm going through over there in Leimert Park. You going through similar stuff. Y'all going through similar stuff. I was it March or it was Mother's Day. I had the opportunity. I was way out in, was it Pacoima? I forget where it was. It was somewhere in the valley. Silmar? I think it was Silmar. Anyway, I was at Luis Rodriguez's Tia Chicha.
That's right, yeah.
And it was such a wonderful, it was a far ass drive. Anyway, but other than that, oh, it's far, my God. But other than that, beautiful space. And he and his wife who created that space, they talked about the need to get back to to listen to our ancestral voices. How we must incorporate that knowledge, that wisdom. But when he was talking about his upbringing, he talked about all the friends he had lost to the police.
Right.
All the friends he had lost to gang violence. All the friends he had lost to drugs. And you know, if you know, You know, Los Angeles geographically, as well as sometimes culturally, is very segregated. So that's why, like, when I think about the valley, I'm like, oh, I'm not driving out there. I ain't going out there. Got the same issues that I have here in South LA. So I'm assuming y'all got the same issues here in Hamilton Park, because we're all living under the same oppressive system. So that's why our stories have to be told, and we need to cross-collaborate. I be talking long when you ask me a
No,
question.
that's, what are you talking about? I'm asking you questions because I want answers.
I be giving you a 15-minute
Good,
answer
good.
to one question.
No, good.
20 minutes.
And I just want to add, like, yes to all that, and yes to the fact that, you know, there's always, and almost exclusively in my experience, whenever you see any really good organizing happening, I promise you it's the person that speaks less in the room that has probably done the most. And it is because, like, the sexy parts are being the Huey, right? It is being the person speaking. But Huey did not make that rally, y'all. Huey did not coordinate the food, keep in mind people's allergies, or, you know, set the schedule. And I think there's something that gets replicated over and over again, and that quote from Asada really kind of touches me, is like, you know, oftentimes you are the gopher. And we say gopher.
Go for this, go for that.
Yeah.
That's what we mean by gopher.
Right. And, you know, oftentimes you are the gopher because the stuff that's happening that's really shiny and bright and beautiful requires a lot of people to make it happen. So, so it really stands out to me, and I always kind of like, you know, I sit on my high horse on that. I'm the one that can really wax poetic on that, because it's just like, I promise you, like, there's a lot of people that made this event happen, whose names you don't know as much as like the speakers, but are not any less important. So it was very important to hear
thing
something
too
like
that I think it was Kathleen Cleaver pointed out, in a patriarchal society, because men are the focal point, that's what the media, which carries the water of this society, they're going to focus on Eldridge. They're going to focus on Huey. They're going to focus on Bobby. They're going to focus on Bunchy Carter. They're not, well, they focus, the only reason, I won't say the only reason, let me take that back. We know Kathleen because she was communications secretary.
Right.
So she was supposed to be out there dealing with
that was her role.
That was her role. We know Afeni because Afeni said, God damn it, I'm going to represent myself in the Panther 21 trial, even though some of her comment was like, oh Lord, not you, please sit down. No, don't do it. And once she was out on bail, she was out there making speeches about the trial and helping to fundraise. So women can be in the public eye, but they're not always looked for or looked at, because the media focuses in on men because it's patriarchal society.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you mentioned Bella Hooks earlier. She has a very long way of explaining it, right? Which I'm not going to remember, but it was like cis, male, white supremacist, heteropatriarchy. You know, she like all the words and put them together. And she's like, because you can't separate them from each other, right? Like, it's not like no one's mad. Like, no, I mean, there are people that are misandrous for sure. But like, no one's mad at men when you say patriarchy or misogynist. You're mad at a structure and a system. And this structure and this system is very deeply tied to, you know, patriarchy and misogyny are tied to white supremacy, and now we know that, and you know, cis heteronormativity, and now we know that you don't have to be, like we said before, you don't actually have to be a white man to uplift these things. And all of us have something that we need to kind of work on, which is our internalized voices of this, and no one's an exception. Like, I hear myself every once in a while, I hear myself like, you know, but I would look cute if I wore more makeup or something like that. And it's like, if I enjoyed it, it's one thing, but like, it's not, right? Like, sometimes it is that little voice telling you to look for these things.
Let me also mention, if not for purchase here in the store, another book you should know about is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. Sanyika Shakur, formerly known as Monster Cody, wrote the book Monster, the autobiography of an LA gang member. This was the last book that Sanyika wrote. He passed, I think it was 3 years ago. And in that book, he's got a chapter entitled, I forgot the actual title, but it's around patriarchy. And the subtitle is Searching the Pathology of Patriarchy. searching for clues at the scene of the crime. And that's one of his essays where he talks about, like Marx talked about, women may have been the first slaves, all women. And that patriarchy was learned and refined through the subjugation of animals. Very, very important essay, mainly because he was a member of the New African Independence Movement, Black man, obviously a soldier, and you don't always hear that type of individual talking about sexism, patriarchy, what is historically relegated as a woman's issue. But again, bell hooks, patriarchy harms men also. So stand up, struggle for it. Might want to check that out when you get a chance.
Sandy, could you tell us about your relationship with Sanika Shakur, like what he meant to you? For those of you that, if you didn't hear, Thandisizwe has a show, Root Work, but you are also part of the Black Liberation Media, and they recently had the discussion that was really wonderful on Sanika Shakur, and they brought you on to discuss a little
No, that was
Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. There's so many podcasts, y'all.
Because Sanika was a theorist.
Yeah.
And I met Sanika through the Spear and Shield Collective, and we would write each other, and in writing each other, we found out we had grown up not that far from each other, going to the same elementary school. And as a matter of fact, his younger brother, Kershawn Scott, who was known as Little Monster, we were in 4th grade together.
Stop it.
We went to 4th grade together, and he kept saying the name Kershawn, or he would call him Little Monster. And I was like, I think I know that name, but I'm not really sure. So I was living in Atlanta at the time, and they brought, New African People's Organization brought Little Monster out there to speak. So I'm in the car when we go pick him up. I didn't see him. He gets in the car behind me. He's sitting behind me. Yeah, my brother, blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. So and so and so. We get out the car and we look at each other like, wait a minute. 4th grade, 54th Street Elementary School. Didn't you? Yeah. So it's like, okay. And at the time, I didn't know, because he was, he had gotten kicked out basically. So I didn't know Monster in elementary school, but we had reestablished that ties of familiarity throughout the neighborhood. And now we were also comrades in the New African Independence Movement.
Yeah.
And I wrote, do you have any tissue? You have a napkin? I like to be prepared. Hopefully I'm not going to start. I'm probably going to start. I hope not, but
I'm still going to put this water closer to you.
I'm a Cancer. I'm also a child of
you're all
Yemen
emotion.
I'm also a child of Yemen child. So I might cry. See, the more I talk about it, here come the tears. Okay. Yeah, okay, I don't need that much.
Gabe said I'm prepared.
So when you ask the question, what Sanika meant to me, excuse me, Sanika was my brother, and I believe he has so much more to contribute, but because of the traumas that he had experienced, he was addicted to drugs. And I didn't see it at first. I knew he was acting erratically. I didn't know the reason why. You know, some people, either from experience or training, they'll say, oh, that's a drug addict right there. You know, I might know somebody's an alcoholic because you can smell the alcohol a mile away, but some people are like, okay, that person is this person is that. I didn't know what was going on with him. I'm just like, why are you flaky? Why are you acting so erratic? And it's because he was using, if not crack, it may have been meth, and he would disappear and be out of touch. He would lose housing. It was just a bunch of things going on, and eventually they found his body, saying it had been decomposing for a couple of days. It was in a homeless encampment in Orange not Orange County. It may have been between San Diego and Orange County. And I was so hurt by that. And I'm still hurt by that because he meant a lot, not only to me personally, but to other people. I don't believe he was finished being an inspiration to other people. And of course, he obviously wasn't finished. I want to say he redeemed himself, but I think he had more to go. But because of the trauma and the quote unquote demons, he was, or the outlet that he chose was drugs. And I just wish that I had been better prepared. I wish that I had been more knowledgeable and had known that and could have helped him more. I wish that he had reached out to others and could have gotten help. I think some people who knew him, who were close to him, were in denial. So I just, it hurts.
Yeah.
I believe that, I think that he believes he's at peace. I remember there's a poem, I want to say it's by a man named Dudley Randall. I think his name is Dudley Randall. And he talks about when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, he said, he's free at last, but death is the slave's freedom. We seek the freedom of free men and women. And I really wish that people didn't have to die to find peace. I want people to find peace here on earth. I'm not talking about Christmas and no Christmas caroling and shit. I want people to be able to have peace while they are alive. And I really wish he could have found that peace while he was alive. Now, in some aspects, that may be selfish, because I want him to be here, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm okay with being selfish. I want him here with us. So.
Yes, and Nika Shakur, folks, if you haven't read some of his books, Monster is, I know, deeply formative, like deeply incredible text. And at least for me, I read it and I was like, is this guy for real? Like, you know, coming straight from the streets and becoming like this really, you know, brilliant theorist. But yeah, definitely, if you haven't, definitely read some Nika Shakur. I'm gonna take a minute and pivot while we're still, we still have some time. And I want to talk a little bit about what we stood for. And Deborah Jones, would you tell us, please, inform us in a better way than I can, about who Deborah is, and why we might know the circumstances that should bring her to be a household name?
Okay, another long answer.
You got it.
If you know anything about the Black Panther Party, especially here in Los Angeles, you know that Bunchy Carter and John Huggins were murdered at UCLA. The gunman was a member of the US organization. If you've read the histories, you have read that there was a struggle between us and the Panthers in LA, that they were in competition, blah, 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 all this, that, and the other. So after Bunchy and John are murdered, people are convinced the US organization is, which is led by a man named Maulana Karenga, co-founder of the organization. Oh, they some agents, they assassinated Bunchy and John, they're working with the government, etc. and so on. Bunchy Carter was a beloved member of the LA/Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party. This is in 1969, January of 69. By May of, and the other thing is that the US organization enjoyed a lot of support in South LA. You would know that by the history books, because most of the history is either focusing on the Panthers or is pro-Panther. But US was well known and very formidable in South LA. They began to steadily lose support behind the murders of Bunchy and John. Mother's Day 1970, Deborah Jones and a woman by the name of Gail Davis. Deborah's African name was Tetemeko. Gail Davis's name was Idili. They were accused by Maulana Karenga of attempting to poison him. He ordered the women to be held in his garage Mother's Day weekend. They were whipped, tortured. Deborah was sexually assaulted on his orders. Every year since then, the US organization, Maulana Karenga, are credited with the founding of Kwanzaa, which is, the Black American celebration that takes place immediately after Christmas, December 26th, January 1st, the cultural expression that Black folks needed. Every year, people who hate Karenga, hate the US organization, 9 times out of 10, they were not on the scene when it happened. They're our age, they came later. Be that as it may, they always, when Kwanzaa comes up, the US organization, they murdered Bunchy and John, right? Well, they tortured them sisters, right? They tortured 2 sisters. I would always hear that once I became aware. But who are these sisters? What's their names? No one would ever say what their names were. I never heard their names. It's not until approximately 2003, 2005 that Scott Brown, a historian, comes out with a book called Fighting for Us, which looks at the rank and file membership and the philosophy and program of the US organization. He finally says their names, Gail Davis and Deborah Jones. And I'm like, so basically what happens is these 2 women are used as a hammer to beat Karenga. These 2 women are not hammers. They are 2 women. They are human beings. What is their story? Because Karenga maintains to this day, it was a frame up, it was trumped up charges that he is innocent. Deborah Jones and Gail Davis say otherwise, that he is not innocent. He did this to us. And for the first time, this is Deborah talking about her life leading into us, what happened that weekend, and the aftermath, how her life took a downward spiral because of that trauma that she suffered. Again, Black women's stories are important. This particular Black woman's story is important. And I was introduced to Deborah. We were introduced basically to help her tell her story, and that's what we have done.
And I'm glad you did, because not only is she someone that grew up in LA and was a part of this organization, she had just been naturally very already, intellectual, critical thinker, right? All the words. She had already been all these things and had joined the US organization. I don't want to say as retaliation, because that's not it at all, but she had been already kind of in and out of trouble, and a lot of it, how we now know that if a kid cannot sit still in class and is bored, it's probably because they're not being challenged. They probably need to be skipped a grade. She mentions this so many times, right? She wasn't great at school for this reason, and her dad gets sent to prison, for selling weed, right? There's still people who are in prison now, right? And just to name that, right, who are in prison for selling weed once upon a time, all the while we have all these really fancy dispensaries, MedMen, whatever, on Venice, let's be for real, right? So, and this is, she kind of also gives you the background of how you have families taken apart by prison. And actually, let me find her words so that I don't have to do it for her, because she does talk about this. I skipped a whole bunch of stuff. Here it is, yeah. Looking back, I shouldn't have complained so much. For all intents and purposes, my childhood ended when I was 12. That's when my father went to prison. My father was sent to San Quentin for 8 years in 1962, At the time, I didn't know where he was. My mother didn't want us to know he was in prison. She cooked up the story for us at the time, between his phone calls home and his letters. It wasn't until I was 17 that our neighbor, Sandra Branch, told me that he was in prison. I didn't believe her, but what she said was true. He was in San Quentin for distributing marijuana. And I'll just read a little further on because this is relevant. My mom had a dilemma on her hands. My father had been our sole provider and my mother had been a homemaker. Now my mother needed to work, but she didn't really know how to since she'd been taken care of by my father. And again, here's how patriarchy hurts us all, right? But when she did start working, she didn't stop. She worked for 40-something years until she died. But at that moment, when my father went away, we were temporarily lost. So I took it upon myself to take care of my sisters and my mother. I called myself stepping up to the plate. She's telling us how her mom is having to work, and now she can't be home as much. So now she's having to pick up as a 12-year-old child, like caretaking, all this invisible work that we understand. But, at some point, her mom ends up dating someone many years later, which means that, she's like, I don't want to be around this guy. And let's be real, I don't know if you remember when you were a kid, if your parents were also, in my generation, separated. You don't want your parents to, date other people. And when they do, you're going to automatically hate them because, fuck that person, that's not my dad, right? But that's what she does, right? So she's going to sleep over at friends' homes. And then she's, trying to have extended stays. And all of this, she ends up being sent to a juvenile hall. So not, what we're hearing is sounding like regular, maybe we have all known someone that had similar experiences. But this is not school to prison pipeline. This is the whole prison industrial complex happening in front of us at this time.
I want to say two things.
Yeah, go ahead.
Don't forget your point. Come back to it.
No, I got it.
About, it was 20 years ago? It may have been less than 20 years in the 21st century. A friend of mine in Atlanta, her husband, they have 6 kids, all boys. And her husband had some type of traffic issue that wasn't taken care of, and he got arrested. Spent maybe a day or a couple of days in jail. And I remember she was so concerned about not telling her sons that he was in jail. This wasn't prison, this was jail, county jail. But neither she nor her husband wanted the children to know he was in jail. So when Deborah said that she didn't know where her father was, that, I don't know how often that happens, but I just want to say it is plausible.
Yeah.
It is plausible.
Yeah.
Because you might think, that's crazy. How did you not know where your daddy was? It's plausible. I don't know how they work it out, how they keep the scam going, but some folks are able to keep the scam going. The other thing that I wanted to say, maybe it's volume 2. I have an interview with a sister friend of mine. Her name is Thandisizwe Chimurenga. She was a member of the Black Panther Party under Bunchy Carter. So she was 16 in 1968 or 69. She told me because she was that age, hanging out with the Panthers, her mother sent her to juvenile hall. Juvenile hall became an option at that time. That blew me away. So the first time I heard Talib say that, I was like, huh? Yeah, my mom sent me to juvenile hall. Because she thought I was in a cult, talking about the Panthers. So when Deborah tells me that her mom, she gets picked up hanging out with the Panthers one night, they take her to juvenile hall. They call her mom. Her mom was like, no, let her stay there. Because she's been running away and I can't control her. I know where she is here in juvenile hall. So that was a viable option. I was like, wow, that's crazy. But,
if only we knew now, if only they knew then what we know now, right? That this was not going to be any longer an option. I wonder if her mom would have made a different choice, but she was struggling. And I'm not trying to play devil's advocate, but what do you do when you have a bunch of kids and their dad is in prison and now you're having to do this whole? And if you have a teenager that's running away all the time, fine, send them to where I know I can find them. But at the time, they didn't necessarily mean send them to juvenile hall, send them to essentially be a part of the system. It meant something very different. But I do want to say she does eventually get arrested for real, right? She does eventually get sent to, she's again picked up again, like many times she gets picked up with Panthers. Like, and she says, like, I'm not even one of them. She says it, like, I'm not even supposed to be here. And she's 17 years old, and she gets sent to
Civil Brands, which
Civil
is closed
Brands.
down now, but it was the women's jail.
Which, like, I spiraled a little bit when I got to that point, and, like, you know, follow me for this little journey. Sybil Brand was a woman that was considered a feminist for advocating for incarcerated women. But in the tradition of white bourgeois feminism, her answer isn't about prisons, like close them down. Her answer was like, we just gotta find a women's prison to put them all in. And they created the Sybil Brand, which is a terrible place. And, you know, and I just want to say, like, I'm just going to read from Deborah's words. You know, so when they all got pulled up, she's, well, whatever, arrested, she goes, oh God, here I go again to this place, McLaren Hall. She's like, well, I was wrong. I was sent with the older women to Sybil Brand Institute for Women. She is 17 years old, she's still a minor, gets picked up and gets sent to this prison. Mind you, for months. It's completely like, her mom cannot find her. She's literally saying, I'm not even active, I wasn't doing anything. But she's like, you know, I also remember something my mom would say to me, never let the world see you cry, never let them see you sweat. Here's a child, a 17-year-old child, who's now having to be tough to survive, right? And it does, she does kind of do this thing where she gets, you know, when they get assaulted, she jumps off the bed and like, jumps on the woman who's about to like attack them. So they send her to solitary confinement. And she goes, and they had the nerve to ask me, would I do it again? Would I defend myself? Hang on a second. Hell yes, I said to them. That little outburst sealed my face. The guards at Brand were white and female, just like the ones in McLaren. Next thing I knew, they were gonna be taking me under the jail. Like, that's what white feminism is to me, y'all. Not only do you say, I'm gonna make a special place for women to go to, which, like, arbitrary, because who knows if you're actually a woman or not, right? And then instead of like being mixed with the men or whatever, but it's just as bad because it's still just the system. And then what we are reproducing is the same thing that happened outside, where like the guards are all white women, the ones in total, you know, unaccountability, and then most of the incarcerated women and folks were Black and Mexican, according to what she says, except for the one white girl that she was with, who definitely got her ass kicked. But you know, this is what we talk about when we talk about like white feminism, and I wonder, you know, and I definitely want to like start shutting up so that people could also like jump in, but like maybe just a quick reaction, like what does white feminism mean to you all? And I'm not saying like we're gonna sit here and be like, you know, fuck white women, because that's not what we're doing, right? Like it's never been that, but it's like what like it. I don't know. Any thoughts before I move on? Any, you know, reactions, like what is white, like bourgeois feminism? And I want to say bourgeois because like, you know, poor white women probably have slightly different circumstances than like the ones that are like in leadership. Not all of them. Anyway, so I don't know if anyone wants to like shout some words that come to mind when you think of like a white bourgeois feminism.
The first thing that came to mind is I think like white feminism is like synonymous with liberalism.
Yeah. Right. Right. Super synonymous. You're supposed to be more progressive because it's like a women's issue, but it's masked by the same thing, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts before
I think like recently we've seen white feminism be protect white women, but not care about, say, Palestinian women being
Right.
bombed.
Right. And even with some of the So Brave title, right? Like all the women are white, all the Blacks are men, but some of us are brave. Like Black women don't even get to be a thing. You don't even get to be any of these things. Just like, you know, white women were fighting for the right to work, and we were like, wait a minute, we've been doing this. We actually don't want to do this shit no more. Can we fight for like nobody working, please? Which like I'm part of that brand for sure. I just thought it was very interesting because like it's kind of like a small bit in there, and it also makes me think of, you know, another one is Sadiya Hartman in Wayward Life's Beautiful Experiments, where she talks about, there's a chapter called Riotous Girls, where there's an article about like a protest, a rebellion that happens inside of Bedford Hills Women's Prison in New York, and they're just shouting, like that's the best way they can be heard. They're shouting through the walls. but like we don't know anybody's names, right? Like these are just nameless women. What we do know the article covered was the name of the guards, which were white women, but we don't get any of the names of the women that were actually protesting and, you know, in rebellion to this. So it's just like, you know, the story's consistent, and like it makes me it kind of breaks my heart for Deborah, especially as like she's telling us that she's like picking up on these things along the way, even as she's being like, you know, she's in the dance troupe, but she's still hearing about these stories, but didn't really get to see any of it. I wonder if any of that, if anything comes to your mind, Thandisizwe, about that, on like even just her time while she was there, because I think a lot of people will be like, well, how did you not know that there was all this stuff going on?
You mean in us organization?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you know, Deborah was going on 18 when she joined. She joined the dance troupe. They're out touring, so she's gone for a year. Then she comes back and sees things happening. And you know, sometimes you're looking at something like, that's not what that is.
Right.
And sometimes you're like, maybe that is what it is. What can I do about it? How can I change it? This is also a time where, because Munchie and John have been murdered,
Right.
Chimurenga is suffering increased paranoia. What I mean by that is, none of us were alive or organizing on the streets when the Panthers were here. Name a member of the Black Panther Party. Just name somebody.
Huey.
What'd you say?
Carmichael.
Stokely was in Snake, but he was
Same
he
thing.
part of it?
Quentin
Yeah.
Tune.
Yeah.
Okay, so-
Mhm.
Somebody, how about you? Name somebody. What name comes to your mind?
You already know.
That's the only one that comes to your mind? Stop it.
Name somebody. You know? Can you name a name? Member of the Black Panther Party?
Angela Davis.
Angela, yeah, was actually a member of the Communist Party, but she studied the Black Panther Party. That was her thesis, and that's how she became.
Okay.
I know, I was about to say, Gabe, how did you not say Harold Wilson? You literally know Harold.
Okay, you name.
Do you need me to do this? You want me to do this?
I want you to do it.
Okay, Janina Irving.
Mhm.
I was almost gonna say also Angela Davis, Asada Shakur, Penny Shakur, we've mentioned,
Mhm.
Harold Welton, Harold Taylor,
Mhm.
Leon. I'm just naming all the ones from the LA now.
But who else? If they're not in LA, you know some names from Panthers who weren't in LA? Name them.
Fred Hamilton.
Chicago, yeah.
Who else? Eldridge Cleaver,
Mhm.
Kathleen Cleaver.
Mhm.
Name somebody from the US organization.
Chimurenga.
Okay, who
That's
else?
what we got.
You don't know. You don't know who these people are. You don't know who the members of the US organization is. So when people were saying they're out to get us, they meant they were out to get Chimurenga.
Mhm.
So he has reason to be fearful
Yeah.
that people are after him. Other people, in addition to Deborah, have talked about, even Amir Baraka said that Chimurenga was using/abusing drugs during this time.
Mhm.
So this heightens his paranoia. So he's paranoid, he thinks everybody's out to get him, and some people are out to get him,
Yeah.
and he blames Deborah and Gail, or accuses them of attempting to kill him. So essentially, her political activism stops that weekend. She's 19 going on 20.
Mhm.
So her political career, political activism, all of that stuff essentially ended at that point in time. But she always maintained an interest. She always knew she was a Black woman, an African woman, named her child an African name, wanted her child to have an African name, but she no longer became involved politically in anything because of that trauma that she suffered.
Yeah.
So her political development was stunted to a certain extent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So this is the kind of thing that we have to keep in mind, take into consideration.
Yeah.
She's not, she can expound on what she dealt with in terms of that year with the dance troupe, things that she saw that she didn't like. She gets back in the organization, sees the day-to-day, and she's automatically like, oh no, this ain't cool. What is this about? What's that? Who's that? And so she's already on Chimurenga's list,
Yeah.
and he's paranoid,
Yeah.
which leads to the torture.
I'm already on Chimurenga's list, and I want to like start wrapping up because I'm not going to give you all the whole book. But already on Chimurenga's list is that from the very beginning that she walks into the office, he's there, and he's immediately like drawn to her, and she's like not at all interested in him at all. But like already we get the predatory, you know, like relationship from the very beginning where he's like, "You're going to be my wife." And she's like, no, I'm not.
No,
She's like, I'm a kid. She's like, he's such an old man to me. She's like, of course he was 27, but I was only like 18 or 17, so I wasn't thinking about him that way. You know, and I mean, she even does a good job. On page 63, she says really quickly, mind you, she's already told us this about him. We already know that he's like obviously like attracts her. He opens up to her in a way that he doesn't with other people. She's like, when I first met Chimurenga, he and I would talk about different things. He confided in me. I guess he thought I was going to be one of his wives. I wasn't, but I would listen to him anyway. He always, from the very beginning, had his intention of making her one of his wives. So the reason why this torture and the, you know, of course, there's like the drugs that we're talking about that could have made him paranoid, but he like she was always destined to be in a very, very hairy situation because the relationship off top was predatory. He'd always wanted her to be one of his wives. He always went to her in a way that was inappropriate, first of all, because she was his child, essentially, but it never stopped being a relationship where he would just kind of try to like soften up to her. So what you would do is, maybe once you're paranoid, you just kind of pivot and now everyone's your enemy, right? So I'm gonna stop there because it's very rich. Like I know that I have these, like I want you to know that I took out the other ones because I was like, I'm not gonna like go past this, is what I said. Like if I do, then there's no reason, like that's it, like I read the book to you. But it is very rich. And like, I really feel like this is one of those, like you said, we know all these Panthers, we've heard their stories, they've written their own stories, memoirs, autobiographies. If people haven't read Assata's autobiography, please do yourself a favor. But like, we don't know about these people in the Us organization. And that was the other group, you know, that was the group that they worked together in South Central specifically. So do yourself a favor. And where is Deborah now? How is she doing now?
Deborah lives in Compton. She retired independent school teacher. And she says she still believes in black people. She still has a love for black people. Still considers herself a revolutionary, even though she's not a part of any political organizations. But she was able to pull herself out of the gutter that she found herself in based upon the traumas she suffered. And she says she still has some physical problems from the torture, her back in particular. But, you know, she's still here with us.
Yeah, shout out to her. Shout out to you for helping write her story with her. The very first thing that we hear, that when you start reading, is Mother's Day. So like, be prepared for some of that. It can be very triggering, but very, very important read. And I just want to personally say, Thandisizwe, thank you so much for always being a griot, documenting stories, uplifting stories, not just in the podcast or in the books, but just generally. And if you all don't have, if you're not as lucky as me and have a personal relationship with Thandisizwe, you would know this, but I can't just call her for 5 minutes because we're both chatterboxes.
Oh my God, no you're
But
not.
we have one call that was like,
You're saying that about me? Listen, there are people I'm like, okay, I'm gonna push the record button when I call this call because they're gonna try to talk to me for 2 hours. There's so many gems that just come out when I'm talking to a lot of the elder folks.
yeah,
Because they want to talk, they just can't help it. It just spills out.
yeah.
And now you're saying that about me.
You're an elder
that's
now.
kinda
You know what?
scary.
I'm almost an elder too. So.
That's frightening almost. That's kind of frightening. I'm not sure what to do with that.
Well, I consider it. Natalie feels very privileged and very special to have ongoing conversations with you. And for those of you who we will not be sharing her contact info with, you can get that through some of these books. And thank you, Gabe, for stocking them. So if any of these conversations were interesting to you, please, What We Stood For, Some of Us Are Brave, Volume 1 and 2, are available at inmybooks.com? No, not .com, but in person. Okay. So thank you so much, Tandy, if y'all can help me. Also, if if there's any questions that come up for you, of course, like, you know, I definitely like.
I
trying
always
to
say
think this
questions, comments, cuss outs.
through. Oh, yeah.
I'll take it all.
Questions, comments, cuss outs, not concerns.
Well, okay. Comments, concerns, cuss outs, questions.
I have one.
Mhm.
Two of our favorite elders are Ron Wilkins and Harold Welton.
Mhm.
Do you have any kind of stories or memories with them?
Any stories? Not really, I don't think. I know Harold is the one who came to Black August LA and said, we should do this Martyrs Tour. And we've been doing it for several years now. I don't want to call it the centerpiece, but so many of us are either old or infirm, or old and infirm. We're not able to do as much as we used to do in terms of Black August LA activities, but we make sure to do the Martyrs Tour every year. And we give thanks and praise to Harold Welton for that.
Is everyone here familiar with what Black August is? And why it's an important,
Oh, no,
month of
we
observation?
can't stay here another hour.
No,
got to
we
go.
can't, no.
We got to go.
Well, Thandisizwe is part of an organization called Black August LA, and they do the Martyrs Tour every August in South Central Compton,
Yeah.
which
And
is,
it's a tour of sites of rebellion and resistance. We go to the site of the Watts Rebellion. We go to the site of 41st and Central, where the Black Panther Party had the shootout with LAPD. That was the first use of the SWAT team. We go to other institutions within the Black community that provided safe harbor to the Panthers. So, and other sites of rebellion and resistance, a few more. So we do that every year toward the end of August.
and if you would like to learn more, June 30th is the orientation for
Next
Black
week, we're doing
August.
an orientation for people who want to become involved in Black August LA activities, want to help us put on some activities. We want to give you an introduction to what Black August LA is. So that's next Sunday, June 30th, noon to 2 p.m. at Chuco's Justice Center, 76 something South Central Avenue.
Yeah, 7625, I
I
think
want to
so,
say that,
something
but
like
I'm
that.
not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, Chico's is also a great spot. If y'all have not been to any events there, just like the fact that it used to be like a courthouse and it has like cells in the back.
It used to be a juvenile
Juvenile,
facility,
right?
a
Yeah,
juvenile.
right. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the power of community coming together to not just making sure that it's closed, but that it continues to actually offer something back into the community.
Mhm.
So great location, great intentionality. If you all would like to do that, that's June 30th, the orientation. But definitely you should join the Black August Martyrs Tour when it comes around.
Mhm.
Because that is a special, very special. Funny thing is I have actually not gone to one of them. I've just
You'll be there this
pushed
year.
people to go to them and always had to have work that day. But this year I will be there, so
Mhm.
follow me down the yellow brick road. Cool.
Any other questions, comments? Oh, there's Winsley.
Yeah, I loved everything you say. Thanks so much. I feel like I'm learning a lot, and I'm wondering if you could say more about, you really mentioned, especially at the beginning, about the New Africa maybe movement, and say for the some of those 5 southern U.S. states, and you also related it to say over here, yes, land taken from the Mexican states, the indigenous people, and there's all sorts of discussions going around, about how to. I think ultimately it comes down to kind of undoing the United States.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, what is the current, status of that? Maybe, I don't know if it's a school of thought, we might call it, a movement, especially towards New Africa. You mentioned there's thoughts about maybe participating in elections towards those kind of goals. So I'm just wondering, I love that. I mean, I've obviously heard about it, but not as much as you spoke about it. So, I'm just wondering if you could say more about that, and maybe is there social media to follow for that movement that I maybe don't know, and I'd just love to hear more about that.
Cooperation Jackson is one
Exactly
organization.
right.
Community Movement Builders, which is based in Atlanta but has chapters outside,
Including LA.
LA, Detroit, New York, etc. One of the founders of the New African Peoples Organization a member of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. That was the organization that came out of the Black Government Conference, Black Power Conference of 1968 that identified New Africa as an objective. It's a man by the name of Chokwe Lumumba. He eventually became, he was a city council person. He eventually became a mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. Ended up passing away, unfortunately. His son, Chokwe Antar Lumumba, is now the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. His daughter, Rukia, is an attorney doing community work in Jackson, Mississippi. There are still chapters of New African People's Organization, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement in Atlanta. There used to be one in Birmingham. There are other organizations in the South in Louisiana that are dealing with the question of self-determination in New Africa and outside of New Africa, in terms of, for example, what are we going to do here in Selma, Alabama? What are we going to do here in New Orleans, Louisiana? There's also the Rebuild Collective, which is a journal, a periodical that comes out maybe 4 times a year, published by the Spear and Shield Collective, that talks about theoretical issues, things that we need to do, as well as a record of what is happening around this concept of New Africa. Spear and Shield Collective is the organization that I found that introduced me to reintroduced me to Sanyika Shakur. So Rebuild Collective is on is RBC National. They're on Instagram. You can get their website there in the back issues of the papers. Cooperation Jackson, Community Movement Builders, New African People's Organization, Malcolm X Grassroots. There's an organization in New Orleans. The name is escaping me at the moment. But one of the organizers is a man named Malcolm Suber, S-U-B-E-R. So, probably forgetting something.
No, but I think that's why when we started, I definitely wanted to name Kalia Kuno and Saki Hall, who are instrumental for Cooperation Jackson. They are, and when we heard about that big flood that they had 2 years ago, they were already ready to manage that. I mean, not that they need more support for sure. Always support them if you can. But they also have a really good book, Jackson Rising, which Kali kind of digs into the weeds, like why we do need to have these spaces of self-determination. I'd also throw into the pot Scalawag magazine. It's an abolitionist journal. Deshaun Harrison wrote this book, Belly of the Beast, on anti-fatness and anti-blackness. They're an incredible writer, deeply, deeply knowledgeable, and they're one of the big editors of Scalawag. So Scalawag is also coming from the South. It's Black publication and Black queer trends, abolitionists, all the great things that should be in one space as well. I don't think that they would call themselves part of the New African People's Movement, so I just wanted to say,
Deep South.
yeah, but they are in the Deep South, also organizing for a form of autonomy, right? A form of community-based autonomy and building, community building.
So yeah, they're out there.
People still fighting to, just like Pain, just like a lot of the indigenous groups are still fighting for land back. These are all the same struggles. We like to cite them, but they really can't be, right? We're on stolen land that we stewarded and built. And I hate the term built a lot, actually, because it's we didn't ask for you, so I'm not doing
brought here to labor for free.
Exactly. So we can be a little bit more candid about that. Yeah.
Thank you again so much for having me.
Thank you.
Unlike driving to the valley, I can come back here. This is cool. This is cool.
Thanks for that.